Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another session of the Hackle Box. Happy Friday. We're just going to chew on it for a few minutes here while everybody rolls in, then we'll get rolling.
It's noon exactly here. It's not afternoon. Don't come at me.
Oh, my bad. Well, in 1 minute, I'll say that again in 60 seconds, and then I'll be accurate.
Perfect. That would make me feel so much better. Please include me.
All right, it's 12:01 there now. Happy afternoon, Eric.
Thank you.
It's Friday. It's actually Friday, and the Cats play tonight. I got at least a hat on. Tomorrow's Catter Day. Looking like a good weekend, hopefully. So what's been new? What you guys been into? Any cool, fun stuff to share?
We've been so last night we were tackling like me and some of the team members were tackling an external penetration test last night. I know obviously can't talk about who or anything too much of the details, right? But just more of the same, I guess. Like one of those situations, the very first password spray we tried, the very first one, got 3 hits.
Oh wow!
And then no multi-factor on the email, so I'm able to jump into that, take a look. Had multi-factor on the VPN, but the process for setting up the VPN was to, once you signed up and received it, then it emailed you your one-time pad to set up your two-factor. So we're able to kind of capture some of that. So that was an interesting one. They did have a thing in place where that one-time pad thing only came in, or it was only good for, it was actually kind of a code to get it with something else, and it was only good for like 30 days. So kind of got in the way, but just, more of the same stuff.
Yeah. What was the hacker tip of the month last month?
Yeah, multi-factor. I think everything.
Yeah. Don't use bad passwords. I think.
Yeah, no bad passwords.
Everything.
Multi-factor. It's just the same stuff. I mean, it's I guess a fun win for us, but it's at the same time just like, hey man, let's not have that be the win. So
yeah, I think sure. I think the neatest thing we saw was this morning. I haven't got to dig into it just because I've been busy all day, but I think one of the guys did find some squirrel waffle IOCs. So I want to dig into that a little bit. Kind of a newish attack. It's not brand new, but pretty new. So
yeah, I've seen that.
Great name though, right? I mean,
squirrel waffle sounds amazing.
I know.
Can't wait. Yeah, I seen that. I actually got that email, the original victim there, and threw it in the lab. Haven't had time to hit it yet, but anxious to tear that one apart.
Yeah.
Is the name just like random words thrown together that have nothing to do with it, or
I don't know actually.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
And that's a pretty cool logo too that I see. I think Kyle shared that in our chat today. It's a squirrel with a big, beautiful waffle with syrup all over it behind it. Yeah, cool, man. It's been a crazy month for me. The last month I've been trekking all over the country and 2 other countries, and today was my first week back in good old Kentucky in almost a month, and I'm happy to be home. I'll say that. We've had a lot of good travel though. It was good to get to see some folks in the Minnesota office. I took a little week of vacation fishing in there, which is fantastic, and then we got to go to Mexico with the leadership team and do some planning for next year. That was a lot of fun. I come home and it's cold now. I don't like that, but that's all right. I'm sure all the Minnesotans here are going to poke fun and say, I bet it's not as cold there as it is here. That will probably be true, but talk to me in the summertime. All right, cool. I think we dig in. I think we're ready to rock and roll. You guys ready?
Always, never. I don't know. One of those.
Born ready. Yeah. All right. Welcome everybody. Hope we got a good session lined up for you. Hopefully you guys get some enjoyment. If you got questions, fire them in the chat. We'll do our best to respond to those as we talk through everything else. Let's get right in it. It's November. Pink, I hear you got a pretty good fishing report for us.
Yeah, 'tis the season, right? So our Hackle Box is a little later in the month next month, so I think it's on the 10th maybe. So gonna go ahead and get this in now because I think a lot of people are doing shopping and stuff for Christmas and whatnot, and just kind of one that, I mean, honestly, it shouldn't surprise us that it's an attack pattern, but just to kind of get everybody aware of it. This is about sort of lost package email phishing attempts, right? So you get the email, in this example we're using is FedEx, but it would be anything, right? USPS, UPS, just whatever, DHL even, if they're still around. I'm pretty sure they are. But yeah, so you get the email that says, hey, your package can't be delivered. Click here to see what your options are, that kind of thing, right? And so the crazy thing about this one is that they ask for a lot of information up front, at least in the attack that we were reading about. A little much, honestly. I think it would probably throw a lot of people off. Like, why do you need my social security number to track down a package, kind of thing. But the initial bit of it is probably enough to get most people right. So the first bit is about, they ask for your name, address, date of birth, and phone number, right? So the date of birth is a little off, but the phone number, address, that's all stuff you usually have in shipping. But then they ask you for a $2.20 redelivery fee. And so basically just a way to get your card number. They don't really care about that $2, but they're getting your card number at that point. And then when you pay for that, then it brings you onto another screen and starts asking for your social security number, your driver's license number, email address, and email password. So I think most people are going to stop at that point. Generally, I mean, it's going to get somebody right, or they wouldn't be doing it. But I think those initial steps are likely to get a lot of folks this holiday season. So the other thing too, down in the email, there are some legitimate FedEx.com addresses, right? Like off to help and things like that would look normal to most people. So yeah, I think it's got a good chance of some success there. So I mean, there are obviously business risks with this because you're going to get these in your business email box and could lead to some compromises there too. But also just hey, warn your family and friends. Like if you see a package thing come in, really scrutinize it. Even if you're missing a package, you think you should have, kind of thing. So pretty quick.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one too, especially for like the average. I mean, if you're like getting out to your work email, I mean, you probably know like, I don't do that with my work email. So hopefully that's not a huge thing. Plenty of people do stuff with their work email though too, right? So I might still get them. But that's one of those things that's really tough. And if it's, make sure I'd say like, I think all the people who generally are coming, checking out the Hackle Box, stuff like that, we're decently smart people who have been doing this, and a lot of stuff might not be new, but like talk to the people around you, talk to people at work, but also talk to your family members, talk to people, tell them about these types of things. Just kind of always encourage people. The one thing I always kind of spread to my family, to my friends, people who are kind of outside this community is just, I get that that's going to give you this rush of like, well, I have gifts that do need to show up, and I don't want to assume that this is a fish and not do it, right? Or not get to a certain point. And I think once you start saying yes to things, this is a classic example of this. We've seen in many types of things with like conning, right? Where you just try to get the client or the client, but the person, whoever the target, right, to say yes to small things and eventually give them more, right? So you go, hey, just verify some information that's basic. Okay, you did that. Now pay this thing. Oh, you gave us your credit card? Now let me see how far I can go with you, right? Because you've already been saying yes to me this whole way, so this feels fine. But the one thing I always encourage people to do, and I think someone just said in chat, maybe something related to it, is, I mean, if you get an email saying it's from UPS or FedEx or USPS or DHL, whatever, call them. Don't use anything in that email, right? Like go look up their number, look up their stuff, call them and be like, hey, I got an email saying that you guys are having trouble with the package. I just want to verify and see what I can do about that, right? Maybe I could get around this fee or whatever, right? But like, it doesn't matter. Just call them. Don't do that link thing. If someone ever calls you, don't give them information. Like I had someone call me recently. It was a legit call, but I was like, I ain't giving you anything. I don't care. Doesn't matter.
Yep. Happens to me every day. Had one today too. Like, hey, this is Oscar Minks. This is so-and-so from this business. Can you verify your identity by giving me the last four of your social? No, I'm not gonna. Forget about it. But yeah, I agree. Like the big thing here, I think most of our listeners are probably going to be able to spot this and stop before they get to the ultimate payload. Tell your friends, tell your elders, tell your grandparents, tell everybody who's probably not going to be quite as quick to acknowledge that or identify that and probably fall victim to it.
Yeah, so. And your coworkers, and train your employees and all that. Just make sure it's getting out there.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good one. And it happens every year, right? This isn't anything new. I think it's just that time of the year where everybody's shipping a lot of packages. People are expecting more packages to be delivered. And so they start playing on that angle. You're going to see these in your inbox, certainly.
I do like the suggestion from someone here. I don't think this went to everyone, it's just us, but I give the wrong information once or twice to confirm that they know what's wrong. It's a good suggestion too.
That is. Yeah, really good.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, the other option of two, I mean, is if they say they want to confirm information, be like, okay, tell me what you know. Mm-hmm. I mean, if they already know it, your confirmation of it is not as bad. Arguably, there's still maybe some issues with that, right? But like realistically, just find out what they know first. You know? Yeah. So I had a situation once where I had to do something like that. And it's just about figuring out, like, sometimes that's what I did once when I had to deal with someone that needed to get like their commission on something, yada, 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 was actually just call a company and have them put something into the system so that that person could then read it from the system and verify that they were working with the same database. So, I mean, they were either with that company or they had hacked that company and they had done their due diligence. And if so, they deserve my money.
Yeah. All right, cool. Thanks for the phishing report, Pink. Was there another thing you were going to give everybody a heads up on?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you for reminding me. So,
Yeah.
just in doing some research this week, something that I had not seen before, but it's a URL. It's Fish Tank. You know, PHISHTANK. Forget how to spell here. .org though, and so what it is just a big giant database of reported phishing domains, and you can report domains and that kind of thing too. And so keep in mind it is community source, right? So some of these could be false and some could be false positives, but look pretty good to me. And I mean, I think I went through 5 or 10 pages and they were all in the same day. So it's a huge database of stuff. So if you get an email from a weird domain and that you're not sure about, that kind of thing, drop it in there and see if it's a known phishing domain. If it is, you're probably safe to go ahead and block it, and things like that. And obviously, you're already suspicious of the email, so don't do anything. But yeah, pretty neat resource to check out there.
Yeah, for sure. Good stuff. I see somebody in the chat too quickly mention like the Great Resignation, allowing folks to send resumes without knowing who or what company they're actually sending it to. And that is a good point too. There's so many scams out there for recruiters who are recruiting fake positions to essentially try to get more information out of you through an email that'll send you to a link to submit all your information. They're going to harvest a ton of your PI, or even through phone conversations. So be very wary of those. I mean, if you're not expecting that, treat it like any other fish.
Yeah, and I'd say too, just on that note of things that you think are legit, or things maybe even services or whatever it might be that you're reaching out to and they're asking you for information, you're like, I don't want to give that. Honestly, ask if that, like, just say I don't want to.
Yeah.
There's so many times I've just been like, I don't want to give you that. I mean, if that means I can't do this, then I'm willing to walk away, potentially. Some people might not, but I mean, at least just start off with like, do I have to give you that?
Yep.
I'd rather not, type of thing, So
cool. Well, thanks for the phishing report, Pink Man. How about our hacker tip of the month? Not the week, the month. What do you got, Eric?
Yeah, so a tool that we use a lot, and as attackers, it's a tool called Bloodhound AD. So if you're an attacker and you haven't heard of it, you need to go look at that. But I want to talk about it from the perspective of people who are, looking at their own environments, right? Either people who are trying to find their own flaws, or maybe someone who's in a position looking at their internal environment to some extent, maybe kind of getting started in a little bit of, we pen test our own environment. We try to find things before we go out to the third party and ask them to look at stuff, right? So many of you might have heard about it, but if you haven't, Bloodhound AD is on GitHub, all right, and it's all one word, Bloodhound AD, and it is a tool that is used to in a Windows Active Directory domain environment. It reaches out to the Active Directory, gets information about the computers, users, different types of GPOs, permissions, things like that. Reaches out to different computers to find which users and groups have permissions on those computers and all kinds of things, right? And it's just gathering information, a lot of permission-based information, stuff like that. And then it ties it together in a graph environment that you can actually just kind of visually kind of see relationships between objects and things like that, right? The reason this is good is really good for both an attacker and a defender is to just see what are some routes between different objects, right? Maybe this user, like, I want to know what this user could get access to, right? And there's built-in queries to kind of find certain information, but if you actually take the time and learn how the tool works and learn the language that it uses to do the queries and stuff, you can do some really powerful stuff with it. And you can really start to break into seeing, do we have any basic users in the environment? Anyone who's just like, I don't know, in this group, let's say, that has access, some kind of path to get to domain admin, or to get to maybe a server admin, or maybe a couple of hosts in your environment that are critical. So you're like, hey, I want to know what users in my environment have paths to that critical device or infrastructure or whatever. It can do that kind of visual relationship to show you maybe a user has a membership to a group that gives them admin over one host, but that host has a service account that runs on it that is part of a different, admin group that has admin over something else. And so if they were to priv-esk on that, they'd be able to do something, right? So it kind of can show you that kind of thing and really make you start to think about and visually see potential paths in your environment that an attacker would use, right? And attackers going to identify them pretty quickly using similar tools, if not that tool itself, if that's blocked in your environment, right? Now, obviously, you have to think about if you're using tools in your environment that you don't want attackers to use. You have to be careful about how you list that for yourself, but still have it be picked up and signatured and whatnot, heuristically checked out on the rest of the machines and the rest of the environment. But I highly recommend that people, if you're not using it now, you don't have anyone in your environment who's using that, and you're at that stage that you think you're ready to be looking at those types of relationships, that you start doing that. It's a really big deal to me. I've always offered to any of our clients, I always tell our consulting team, stuff like that, like if anybody ever shows interest in it, I'll do a free consultation with them, type of thing. Like I want people to learn these types of things, likewise, I'm not going to sit there for hours on call with anyone, but if anyone listening to this right now is curious about like how to kind of get started with that idea, send an email to Hackle Box. I'll respond to that. I'm happy to help out. These types of things, the more we know about our own environments and the more we know about the paths an attacker's going to try to take, the more we can fix those things and get ahead of them. So that's the hacker tip.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's like, a good tool to have in the box for any domain administrator, right? And it's a way for them. I know one of the biggest challenges for domain admins is being able to really audit your groups and your memberships for all your systems and your users in that environment. And we see it all the time, right? Say maybe somebody elevates privileges for a specific service account to test something out that works now, and then they never go back and reinvestigate that. Like, hey, we got it working, kind of leave it alone, but without doing that analysis just to see what other impact elevating that service could have to your domain at that level. We see a lot of people forget to make those changes, revert those changes, and implement proper security there. So I think this is a tool to help simplify that process a little bit for folks.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like, even I rented our own environment a couple of years back, right? And we saw that while we had disabled an account of an ex-employee, there was actually a session running on a host somewhere in a server that was still running, left idle. Like, we learned that something was out there, but two, that we didn't have an idle timeout on that setup, right? And we had to fix that too. So just little things like that where you're like, no, I mean, we're security, we're on top of this, we know these things. We start to find things and we go, well, yeah, we had disabled that account and it shouldn't have been able to do anything other than just have its existing stuff, but like we wanted to catch that stuff too, So
yeah,
you can learn a lot of stuff that you might not realize, like you said, just things that are just hanging out there. Eric in chat said, can you do a demo on Hackle Box sometime? It's unlikely that I would do that, purely because we would have to set up a test environment with test users, test groups, test computers, all this stuff. I'd have to configure a whole lab just to go through and kind of show that. Otherwise, I'd have to use client data, which I can't do either. So I'm happy, like I said, to help out here and there. And if people want to reach out and kind of talk about it, I'll help you out for sure. But doing it a full-on just kind of demo, there's other people out there with demos on it. If you look at it, I'm sure you can find those.
I'm sure there's some good YouTube demos. There's a lot of documentation about the tool online as well. Dig into that stuff, give it a whirl. If you get stuck, holler at us here at the Hackle Box and we'll get Eric on a call with you.
Yeah, I was just going to say too, the thing that I really like about, and you described this here too, was just that, a lot of times when we're working on an attack, the question we get is like, how do they move from user X, with no permissions to domain admin, that kind of thing, right? And so you can figure those paths out and figure it, like you said, they both have access to this server, possibly compromising things there, that kind of thing. And I think it helps people understand, right, that every user in your environment matters. Because sometimes people are like, it's just a reception, kiosk computer. We have a kiosk 1 and kiosk 1, 2, 3 for the password kind of thing, and why that's a problem and that kind of thing. So I love it for that.
It makes you think about too, just kind of the overlap of roles in different parts of the environment. A lot of people don't think about the fact that, well, like, this is a low privilege user, like in most of the environment. Sure, they're high privilege in one spot, but that's just that risk, right? But they don't think about how, well, what else has high privilege and what else is using that on that box? What else could they maybe pivot to once they get to that machine, right? We've seen some environments. I've seen some great environments, honestly, environments that were super locked down in a lot of ways. And every time we'd like go to get on, compromise a host and like a standard user, it was good. And then one time I was going through, just walking through the Bloodhound data with them, because I was on site. So I was able to do that. I love being on site in certain ways because I could just sit there and be like, hey, look over my shoulder. Let me show you some stuff, right? And I was sitting with them. I was like, yeah, like none of these computers here in your marketing area, let's say, or in your IT area here are going to get me there. But you know what can actually get me to domain admin within 10 minutes? Their front desk computer.
Yeah.
And it was true. I mean, like they had a security front desk, right? This client has security up front, and the security actually has certain permissions for certain thing, and that
Right.
would have gotten you all the way. So if they stepped away for a second, they didn't have it covered, someone could have sat down and actually compromised the entire environment from that front desk computer.
Yep.
So it's important to kind of look at all those different routes. So
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. I think that's a damn good hacker tip of the month. I appreciate that.
heck yeah.
You guys want to roll on some news here? We got a bunch of stories. Let's dig in. I think the first one I got on my list here is the SolarWinds vulnerability in the ServView file server that's being actively exploited right now by the Clop ransomware gang. I think we've probably talked about Clop on here before, I believe. But essentially, this is the same old story of other things we've talked about before. There's a known vulnerability. This vulnerability is in the SSH protocol within ServView file. It's a memory escape vulnerability that essentially will allow the attacker to remotely run arbitrary code with privileges on that system. This vulnerability has been out since July. It's been patched for a while. So at this point, we're urging everybody just to be aware if you're running ServView, make sure you have applied that latest patch. I think some people are a little trigger shy with SolarWinds patches. I don't know why, but this one you need to get on there real quick because adversaries are actively targeting it. This time it's a Russian APT, but this isn't the first time. We've seen a few months ago a Chinese APT was targeting as well. So get that patch on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know, like you said, people are a little gun shy on SolarWinds patches, so I'm guessing that's why there's still quite a few of those still out there that haven't been patched. But other things too. Pretty standard attack pattern after they compromise here, right? From what we've seen.
Yeah.
So just make sure you get your alerting and that kind of thing set up as well. Looking for encoded PowerShell and a lot of that type of stuff. That make sure you're detecting that as well.
Yeah, we so I know like an article I'd looked at and read, they said that they had identified about 550 publicly available and vulnerable domestic, so United States systems that were still there. I don't know if that number's right or not. I know with Project Coffee, I do have the guys working on it right now. I pulled down a list of about 32,000 servers that are running ServView that are domestic right now. As far as the versions of those, it's going to take a little massaging that data to try to determine that, but we're working through that. So for our members in the HIFI network, we are actively researching that to see if you're affected by this. If so, when we identify that, we will be reaching out. So I guess
on your own as well.
Yeah, check on your own for sure. Yeah, I'm not saying we're going to do it. Do it yourself for sure. There are some IOCs you should look for. So if it turns out, hey, I've got this and I haven't patched, you probably need to check and make sure you haven't been compromised at this point. The big thing I think is look for a sub process for that primary ServView process that wouldn't be typically there. Something that could have been created. So they do launch a sub process from ServView. That sub process essentially gives the attacker control to execute code. We know that they're like other attacks using a lot of encoded PowerShell, like Pinky said. So look through your PowerShell logs, see if you see any encoded PowerShell. I think the secondary payload for this particular APT has been to deploy Cobalt Strike, pretty typical that we see as well. So look for signs of Cobalt Strike in your environment. Again, a lot of times you're going to see that in encoded PowerShell if they do have a Cobalt Strike beacon deployed. The one that I found was interesting too, that is a kind of an easy one to look at. There's a scheduled task called Reg Auto Backup. They are modifying that task. So check your system, check the modified date on that. If you haven't modified that, that modified date should be pretty old. If you see a somewhat recent in the last 6 month modification date, that scheduled task probably means you're compromised at that point. So, and I think the other one too is there's a log. It's a debug socket log.txt. It's in your ServView installation folders. Check that log too for signs of compromise. So there'll be suspicious entries in there that would show them deploying the other service, probably passing through some commands and so on. Anything else on that one, Pink, that I should look for?
Just well, this is even more of a general recommendation too. It was in this article, so good time to bring it up. But if you've got a seam, if you've got a SOC that you forward logs to or something like that, make sure they're checking out those 4104 event IDs. Those are the script blocks from the PowerShell log.
Yeah, right.
Look, keep an eye on those just anyway, right? If you see encoded
General
PowerShell, you don't
practice.
expect-
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, how many attacks do we see that are using PowerShell that aren't using encoded PowerShell or download Cradle or something like that, right? That you can kind of configure your things to alert you on, and you're not going to have that many false positives. Most people aren't downloading files with download Cradles on a daily basis. So,
Right.
yeah, just keep an eye on those.
And also too, like we always talk about default deny here. If you're running ServView, lock it down. And you know, I understand too, it's a file sharing application. So maybe you need that to be public to some extent. But if you don't, take a hard look at, you know, that profile. And if you have the ability to implement allow listing for the folks who need to connect to that service, do that. And that alleviates all your risk here. All right, cool. Let's boogie along then. Next one up, this article broke. Some researchers from the University of Cambria discovered a vulnerability they're calling Trojan Source. I've seen it in other places known as the invisible source code vulnerabilities. It's essentially a vulnerability identified in code compilers, software development environments, and so on. Eric, you want to give us a rundown on this one?
Yeah, I can do that. So, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's a thing that's actually kind of known about in a lot of other ways. And I think if someone else thought about it from this perspective, right? But essentially, you know, we're not, English is not the only language in the world. And there's plenty of languages that go left to right or go right to left, you know, yada, yada, yada. There are Unicode characters kind of that you can throw in, and you can switch the direction of text in line, right? I could be typing a sentence, and then all of a sudden I can throw one of those characters in and start typing, and all of a sudden the text goes backwards, and I could throw the other character in, it goes back to left to right. You can use that. You can abuse that and tricking people because something might look one way, but actually technically be another direction, right? This is something that I have used and other attackers in the world have used, both, you know, white hat or black hat for that matter, to do things like making a .exe look like it's not a .exe, right? I mean, if I make a name and then I do a reverse the characters and then I type in pd or fdp.exe, well, now the exe goes on the left side and it looks like a .pdf and it says .pdf. When you look at it, when you read it, it says .pdf, but in reality it's a .exe because I switched the direction of the text, right? So this has been known. This is a thing that gets used and abused in different situations. So they took that and they said, well, what about in source code, right? And the compiler is not going to look at it differently, but when you're actually visually looking at it, it looks different. So the situations that you'd be able to put code in and it would be in reverse. So visually you'd see one thing, but the compiler would kind of see the other thing because it would ignore those codes, right? And so the argument in this is kind of like, hey, it's possible to slip by something, right? If you're reviewing code and you're looking at it and you see it and it looks fine, maybe because it looks like it's commented out. Or an example they gave in the paper is like an if check that says like, if you know, username does not, or you know, equals admin or does not equal whatever, right? Basically, then it's this. And then if they had that code in there, instead of actually checking to see if it's admin, it's checking to see if it's admin A, B, C, D, E, F or something weird that was in the comment, right? And so because of that, you'd be able to change a check and actually make it so that it's not checking to just see if it's the admin, it's checking to see if they're not the admin, essentially, right? Is what it comes down to. So it could be used in a way that would be that could be used maliciously. So that's one of those things that I you know, most of the time, I think if anybody tried to make anything like really big, like include a large malicious payload into a thing, you'd see a bunch of reverse comments or something like that, lines, and it would look very, very suspicious. But as far as like changing the result of an if check, that could be done without anyone really noticing. And I think the big concern here comes up, I think they brought up in this, and it makes sense, is that, you know, there are plenty of projects out there that are public contribution projects, right? Where anybody can submit a pull request and then someone on that team is going to manually review that pull request and include it if it looks good, right? And so if you can identify kind of an issue that needs to be fixed in a file that you might be able to maliciously attempt to, you know, whatever to, then you could potentially get a pull request and then someone could look it over. And if they're not being super thorough, they might approve that change and you could slip in some malicious code, right? We were talking about this, Oscar, Pinky, and I beforehand, and I was thinking, you know, I would like to hope that people who are managing these types of source repositories and stuff are going, why did they make a change here? if that
Yeah,
has no
right.
need here, what, that's the exact same line, but now they just added a comment or they just did this. Why would they do that? Right? Like that has nothing to do with this or whatever. But that's a benefit of the doubt I'm giving that probably isn't fully accurate to the reality of the situation. Right. And I think that, this is a potential issue. And the unfortunate thing about this issue is that it's going to come down to all kinds of different tools out there that are used to display this stuff to kind of pick that up, right? There's no like one person out there who could just fix this.
Yeah. Yep.
GitHub, we want that, like obviously to show it, and hopefully they probably take some steps to it right away. I would imagine because they're a big enough company and they're dealing with a lot of sores, and there's going to probably be a draw for that. But I mean, if we're talking about like, I don't know, Visual Studio Code or Notepad++, or I mean, all these different text editors or IDEs and stuff that people are using, Visual Studio in general, things like that, like there's a lot of places this would need to get fixed to really pick up some of that stuff, maybe even if GitHub does it,
sure.
but I pull this data directly, I just sync a Git repository and I load it up in my IDE, will I not notice it type of thing, right? Check it out.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing you hit on there is just code validation. Like have general hygiene and best practice for validating your code when you're bringing code into your environment. Now, like those public sources are a little different, but a lot of folks use those resources when they're creating their own code. So I would say stress that importance of validating the code. Don't be trained to, like we all are, to just skip past comment sections, pay a little attention, especially if they look funny. And like you mentioned earlier, we're talking about this, like, if you see this technique, you're going to see code reverse. It's going to look off to your eye. If you just pay attention to what's behind that code, you're going to realize, or that comment, you'll probably quickly realize this looks abnormal. This is not human readable text. What is this? Oh, shoot, this is code. What is it doing? Let's pull that.
Yeah, I have some worries that are a little outside of that too. Just thinking about like development life cycle and that kind of thing, right? Pulling down chunks of code, dropping them in and running them and testing them, even in your, kind of your sandbox environments. That we're all using sandbox environments for that kind of thing, right? We're not doing that on our overprivileged account on our workstation. So, and some things like that worry me a little bit with maybe just folks testing some things, right? Let me grab this code snippet. I'll see if it works. Once it works, I'll go back and see what it's doing. So I can accommodate or, account for that. But I worry a little bit about developers. I just in past lives, it seems like they're often overprivileged, and I love all of our developers that are listening right now, but you often have more permissions than you should. Things like that too. And it makes me a little concerned there. And I'm with you, Eric, on all the different IDEs and stuff too. Like, I mean, how often do people update Notepad++, right?
Yeah. I've seen the researchers here from Cambria have reached out. They said they've hit up 19 different software suppliers. 9 of those 19 have committed to releasing a patch. The other 10 are not responding, it sounds like, or haven't actually committed to a patch yet. 11 of them paid a bounty, which was interesting. Average payment of that bounty was $2,246.
Actually, take a look at that. It was 11 offered a bounty and only 5 paid. So
I see.
Yeah, I thought that was a little shame.
Yep.
Offer a bounty program in general, not offer and pull back on it. It's going to be a lot to fix in this. It's good that they discovered it. Again, this is not an old, this is not a new trick. This is an old trick, but it's a new imagining of it, right? And I'm glad that they did it. There are some situations, like I said, if it was a large payload, you should be able to kind of tell something's off. There's some situations definitely where you'd be able to sneak something by, and even a discerning eye might let it go through. Just an FYI, as someone who's messed with this stuff and tested this stuff in the past, this is not a reliable way to detect this. I'm not saying, oh, if you do this, you're fine. But if you're ever curious, you see something weird like that, and you're like, oh, I remember hearing something about lines that could do this. If you go to highlight the text, if you're highlighting like left to right on the text, what will happen is like you'll be highlighting and it'll go this way, and then all of a sudden it'll go this way when you're highlighting through the text. So you can actually see that if you just go highlight left to right, you'll see that the actual text direction of the highlight changes as you're highlighting that line, and you'll see that things are changing there. So
right. Yeah, good trick. I guess good news at this point, there's no evidence this has been exploited. That being said, I mean, I don't know how we could prove it hasn't. Yeah, it's out there. It's definitely folks are going to try it for sure.
Yeah, this is a tough one of those ones for putting out there in the public, is because now that it's out there, it's going to take a lot of effort to actually fix it across the board. So
Yep, I agree. Yeah, where I see like a risk too, we're talking about like it would probably be obvious if you had these chunks of code that were in reverse or whatever, that would probably stick out even behind the comments. But what I think is if what they were like just kind of stashing snips, right? Maybe building a variable over a huge code set, right? And you don't really notice that because we're seeing 3 characters stashed in these lines of comment sections throughout. And at the end, you build that variable, send that variable to download Gradle, get a beacon, right? So I think there are ways they could use this cleverly to be able to disguise the attack. Still just goes back to what you said, man. Code hygiene. Let's make sure you're familiar with what you're bringing into your environment. Inspect every line.
Yeah, luckily with object-oriented programming, which most people are using a more object-oriented approach to larger things like this, that would be difficult. And even then, you'd have that pull request. Like, why do they add 57 different lines in random places?
Right.
So hopefully that actually would stand out much worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, we just got to be diligent on these types of things in general.
Yep, for sure. All right, cool. Let's boogie on to the next one. So it was published over the last few weeks that researchers identified vulnerabilities in the AWS API gateway. So essentially, the attacker found a way to be able to bypass API IP restrictions. They were allow listing the API by modifying the HTTP header, utilizing what we know as a request smuggling attack. Yeah. So Eric, you want to go through the request smuggling? Put you on the spot again, man.
Yeah, sure. We have HTTP request smuggling. There's header smuggling. Essentially, with all of these attacks, I'm not gonna dive deep on this one. I'm just gonna say with all these attacks, generally what we're looking at is relying on 2 different services, applications, pieces of technology, whatever you want to call it, interpreting data differently. Okay, so it comes down to, and so with the general like HTTP request smuggling, a lot of times it's talking about different types of headers that can be used to determine or to declare what the length of the request packet is, right? And so you'll see some situations where you'll have 2 different headers or a misspelled header or something like that, 2 different ones that get interpreted 2 different ways, and there'll be a front end like maybe a reverse proxy like Nginx or something else. And that will interpret the data one way, and then it passes it on, and the backend server that receives it interprets the data differently. And so something happens where it thinks that is now more than one request or not a full request, and it trails information onto someone else's request. What it leads to is essentially sometimes the ability to include headers or other full requests prepended or something like that to someone else's stuff, or something that gets put into a cache, etc., and it can attack something, right? So in this particular case, this was not this was a header smuggle that was being used off of the x-forwarded for header, essentially by putting in a space, like going x-forwarded for space, some letters, colon, and the thing. The initial, I believe, if I understand this correctly, and I didn't read super thoroughly on this, but if I understand it correctly, the initial reverse proxy or load balancer, whatever the initial front end device, threw that out, or supposed to throw that out, but it didn't because it wasn't able to. That's what it was, because it saw the initial part was right, and then it passed it on, and it actually got interpreted differently on the back end, and basically allowed them to bypass that IP check because the exported for was being used to determine where that came from, right? And since that data was now in control, it was getting messed up. So this is a tough one, right? This is a tough one when you look at it in your environment, because a lot of times you have no idea. There's no way to know how every single thing is implemented in the applications, the software, the technology that you're using. There's no way to know that. There are standards for these types of things, how headers should be interpreted, what exactly that header should be, and what should be thrown out versus what is. But everybody implements those standards in different ways programmatically, and sometimes they don't realize that they programmatically left a loophole, right, or a hole that someone can take advantage of. And there's no way generally for the average person who's consuming and purchasing these pieces of software to know that either, right? It just has to get tested. It just has to be found out in this way. There's I wish I could have some way of going, now go test all your stuff with this, and you'll know, because you just not gonna. There's tools to test certain parts of it, but parts of it might not get detected. I know actually the researcher who did this actually released a tool to help find some of this, but I guarantee you won't find everything. It's just
no way.
It's too hard. And so that's kind of the high level of that, is that basically what this allowed it to do was pass a header through that should have been rejected in the front end, but didn't. And it made it through to the back end. It was able to bypass something there.
Yeah, and this isn't a new attack, right? Just new for the AWS API. This is seen in a lot of different applications, specifically like in that where you're talking about where there's a front end and there's a back end, because there's a negotiation between that.
Yeah.
And there's often ways to trick that front end to passing your packets to the back end.
Yeah.
The one thing that I was a little curious about too, I did notice in this one, so they mentioned you need to know the allow listed IPs to be able to successfully exploit this attack.
Mhm.
And so the article tries to put this into a point of like where, oh, it's going to be difficult to find those IPs. So, and I took it as like it's lower priority or lower criticality because the attacker has to identify the IPs that you'll be accessing the AWS API from.
Right.
But when I look at that from an attacker standpoint, right, if we found, an FRSecure related AWS API and we were an attacker, how hard would it really be to figure out those IPs? I mean, it is possible. It does add a layer of difficulty.
Mhm.
It's still possible, right? I don't think that you should, in this case, the allow listing is great, but don't assume because you are allow listing that you're not going to be susceptible to this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we always have the security in depth, right? Layered
Mhm.
security. We have to go, we have these things, but then what else can someone might be able to take advantage of later on.
Yep.
Yeah. I wouldn't just assume, oh, that's to have more information so they won't be able to get it, so it'll be fine. But
Right.
yeah.
Well, I mean, think too. I mean, it probably depends on how it's configured, and are you VPNing in to get to this point, that kind of thing too. There's gonna be some protections you can put in place like that as well.
Mhm.
Maybe depending on what you're doing there and that kind of thing. But even still, the thing that I took from this one too is just it's something we keep seeing a lot more of, right? I think we're going to continue to see more of as we see more things, to the cloud. It's you don't always know what's happening. Kind of like Eric was saying, it's impossible to validate all this stuff yourself, and
Mhm.
and oftentimes it's difficult to understand how things are being handled in cloud environments and that kind of thing, right? And not to say that it's impossible, not to say you shouldn't try. Just saying a lot of times things get missed. I know we've talked about it a few times on here with things like Azure servers and things like that. Sometimes that firewall is a little tricky to configure, and people leave things open. So to me, it was more of the same on that, just a different way of attacking that.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Another interesting tidbit about this was the researcher identified a second vulnerability, allowed him to employ a cache poisoning attack that essentially would allow him to create his own API, or him or her to create their own API to return malicious content. I didn't find a lot of details about that particular vulnerability. I don't know if you guys had time to dig into that one, but
Starts getting pretty technical. I'm probably not going to dig into it, but yeah, like I said, just with some of the stuff when you come across these types of attacks, sometimes cache poisoning is one of those things that comes along with that, can allow for some interesting effects as well.
Yep. Yeah, at this point, I would just say be aware if you are using AWS API that this is a risk. I'm sure there are opportunities now, even though AWS hasn't responded to this. But if you have sufficient logging on that front end server, hopefully there would be indicators that you could review to be able to identify this. Keep an eye out on this one too. I'm sure AWS will respond. I think this one's pretty recent, and given the severity, I expect they will. Yeah, so there's the free tool Eric mentioned. I've got the link. We'll put this in the notes to their Black Hat talk, and I think in the Black Hat talk is where he actually gives that tool out. So I'll make sure that you guys get a copy of that link if you want to check your web servers for header smuggling attacks. Like Eric said, though, don't treat it as a silver bullet. Good chance, even if this tool doesn't identify a vulnerability related to that, it's still possible.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that there's a good chance it's there, but I mean, it's still possible that it's there.
Still
right?
possible.
So, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have said good chance and
Yeah.
still possible. It's a good chance it might be possible. 50% of the time, it works every time.
Yeah.
Come on. Next one up, QR codes helping attackers sneak emails past security controls. We've seen this and kind of had a laugh. And like, well, let's dig in and study it. Let's see what it comes out to be. It's exactly just what we thought it would be. So essentially, obviously, most people, your email systems, your security systems surrounding your email are likely not scanning for QR codes and tagging QR codes embedded in an email as malicious. Attackers know this. And so same old trick. We've seen this trick for a while where attackers have been embedding malicious links into QR codes, social media, text messages, physical mail, flyers, stickers at DEF CON, all those things. And so, yeah, they're just pivoting to emails now. What do you guys think about this one?
I don't know, man. I've not trusted a QR code since
Right.
it became a thing, right? So I even hate doing the ones for like MFA registration. I'm like, I don't know, like really, But yeah, I mean, it kind of is what it is. It's a neat new way of getting around that. We've talked about other things with links off to OneNote sites and things like that, things that are OneNote pages that are legitimate and that kind of thing. But kind of a neat way to do it.
I hate scanning QR codes as well. Like now, since COVID, right? Every restaurant is going to the digital menu. Every time I walk into a restaurant and they're like, here, scan the QR code for the menu. I'm like, man, just give me a paper menu. I'll wash my hands. I'm fine. I'll wash my hands.
Well, they don't want to print them all. That was the thing. I don't know what it's like for other people out there. Are there any of your local restaurants or anything like that doing that? Or is that just when we were in Vegas that you saw that? The QR code thing?
Not here. I mean,
no, a lot of the local ones here are doing it now too.
Okay. See, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I live in Reno, right, which is still a tourist area to some extent, not nearly the same as Vegas, but like here, I don't see that really. People just hand out menus still. They paper menus, they throw them out when you're done, type of thing. So just for anyone listening, like this is something that's sort of happening with the pandemic. So if you haven't seen it, it might just not be happening in your area, but higher traffic area or places like that with the pandemic just didn't want to keep printing out paper menus. It doesn't have to be necessarily high traffic touristy areas, but they just got tired of doing that. Because of just the cost of it and the time consumption of it, right? And so we saw this a lot at DEF CON in Las Vegas. Every single restaurant I went to, it was just like, here's a QR code for the breakfast menu, here's a QR code for the lunch menu, dinner menu, the drink menu, whatever. That QR codes for everything, right? And they'd have them just posted on like the beam as you entered, like some pillar or some like whatever as you entered. And so what we saw a lot of in DEF CON was people covering those QRs with their own malicious ones. So you'd walk up to scan a menu and all of a sudden you get taken to some site or something like that. Either be advertisement or malicious, right? And so having experienced that and been part of that and seen that stuff, this isn't surprising, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like
not at all.
Just getting people more and more used to like messing with QR codes and seeing where we can throw them. I think it's an interesting thing. Like if I got an email being like, here's a QR code for something, me personally be like, no, I hate QR codes in general. Like we just talked about the three of us in general. I'm like, I'm actually so bad about it that I will save the image, move it to a VM, actually use a Python thing to interpret it and tell me the text from it. Because I got nothing better to do with my time, apparently. And I wouldn't have a problem scanning with my phone if I think the biggest issue that what scares anyone in security and stuff like that about a QR code is that your phone automatically wants to visit the link or do something. Yeah. It's just like, if this was just a text reader, I'd be more open to it potentially. But yeah.
I like to throw it in the lab and tear it apart. I was actually telling our guys they got a legitimate email earlier today, but it kind of freaked everyone out because they didn't know what it was. And one of the guys was like, this is me. He did a fancy little GIF for taking it to the lab and tearing it apart or whatever. But it's like, that's a great idea. I mean, use your skills, right?
Yeah, and in this case too, like this particular article we're looking at, so this QR code, like you think about the layer of complexity that adds to the attack, right? So you're sending no longer a malicious link or attachment to someone's work email, trying to harvest those creds. They send it there. They got to pull out their phone. They're going to scan that QR code from their phone. This QR code did send their phone to a cloned Microsoft login, right? And so then they got to put in their work creds or their Microsoft creds into their phone to log in to see the results of this QR payload. And that's how the attacker gets those creds. So I'm guessing with that layer of complexity, we're probably going to have a much lower success rate. I would think that's something that hopefully folks would identify, like we're talking about the wayward package before, right? This is out of sorts. This is not normal. I'm not going to put my creds in here. But either way, I think it's something for all of our listeners here, just to, again, educate your people, make sure they're aware of this, make sure they understand. Don't be scanning QR codes you're not expecting to come in. Actually, just don't scan them if you don't have to.
Don't scan them. Yeah. I was gonna say, I think I could actually think of a few better ways to use this attack than these people are doing it. I'm not gonna go too deep into that. I'm sure we can all figure it out if we think about it. But Yeah, I know. Yeah, just don't scan the QR codes. I think that's probably the best policy there.
Yeah, I think I'm curious though to see how like our adoption of QR codes is increasing, right? And I am curious to see kind of where that leads. Right now, and I'm sure there's a plugin already that I just haven't used, I'm not aware of. So don't make it, I'm not totally naive to this, maybe just a little ignorant to it. But right now, if I see a QR code come in, or if the average person sees a QR code come in their email or on a website or something like that, they're pulling the phone out, right? They're doing it on their phone, and you're risking compromising their phone or something like that, which is still a decent target, right? But how long until like those things get automatically picked up on your computer through some plugins that are just kind of built into something? You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure.
Right.
As
Yeah.
you know, as is it Robert? Yeah, in chat, just pointed out to us, right, that you know, you can generate QR codes in like MS Edge because you use Chromium now, and in different browsers and stuff. You actually have that option. I know that it's not even just there. I think it's on my Mac too. I don't use often, but I noticed it and I was like, what is it? Anyway, if you're at a URL, you can just like click, hey, create QR code, and then send that to someone and share it with them that way, right? Maybe it's on my phone apps. I can't remember, but I've seen it plenty of times, and I don't use MS Edge, so it's in other places. And yeah, like if we are going to do that, if that's what the browsers are going to start pushing, like, oh, share this with someone through a QR code instead of like what was the old way, was a bit.ly link or something, right? But now it's just like, here's this, share it this way. Well, then people are going to want to be able to have that interchangeability between desktop and mobile, et cetera, right? Tablet, yada, yada. And so we're going to start, I think, seeing more. If they continue down that route, we're going to see more built-in tools to automatically scan those, and that could be.
I think they'll have to be native interpreters in our modern browsers, right?
So yeah.
Hopefully with that comes some native scanning, right, on your email appliances and things like that. For let me scan this, see where this link goes, and do like the safe links or sandbox type stuff with it. Hopefully, we'll see though. I'm sure if you'll get through before that.
I see someone commented. Charles here said he thought about mowing his lawn into a QR code to see if Google Maps would access a link. Hey, I like it. I think you should do it.
I'm fully in support of this. Yeah.
Yes, please share your results.
Yeah, link it to the Hackle Box if you don't mind.
Sure.
Actually, we'll just have Charles come on as a guest.
I was gonna say, that's our Charles. So we'll just bring him in.
Come present his findings on the Hackle Box.
Love it. All right, cool. We got a couple quick hitters. We're just going to go through super fast, so you guys are aware. FBI rated a Chinese point of sale manufacturer, PAX technology. Just want to give you guys a heads up. So if you are running point of sale systems by PAX, I'd probably rip the infrastructure right now. Turns out that it was discovered that they were being used as malware droppers for the deploying command and control and network compromise. So if you're using PAX point of sale, pull it, find something new. Not a good day for you, I would say. A lot of patches came out. Microsoft Patch Tuesday this month. Big one, there was Exchange Server 0 day again. Exploit code is available, and it has been actively exploited. So we urge you guys to get those patches out as soon as possible. Make sure you don't become a victim. And then, hey, Pink, you want to hit the last one? You're the one who brought this up.
Yeah, so really just Ryuk is back, or Ryuk, or RYUK, the ransomware that's out there. So we've worked some pretty significant cases with that in the past, and it's kind of back. It went away for a while. It's back. They've switched over. Looks like the old attack pattern was more TrickBot and Emotet to start, and then roll into a couple other things, and then it ended up with Ryuk. Now it looks like they're using the Bazaar loader malware, so that thing's been picking up steam a lot. We've been seeing that pop up in tons of ransomware campaigns lately, so pretty effective. Just keep that in mind. Ryuk was pretty nasty last time around. I can't imagine it's any better now, so just be aware of that.
Cool. I think that's it. Great show this week. Is there anything else, Eric, Pink, you guys would like to share before we shut her down?
I guess I'll just, since we have a couple minutes, just touch on the things you just touched on, right? The point of sale thing. I mean, we don't 100% know for sure. There's some sources that are saying certain things. There's some back and forth on it. I don't want to be like outright, like it was this, you know what I mean? Like from our perspective, but there's some
some stuff that is saying that there's some at least suspicious traffic. It seems related to that. It seems like there's investigation that's showing that. I believe that they're saying this is just geolocation stuff, is what they're saying. So that's why there's data going out to third parties, is because there's geolocation software, yada yada yada. That's what their claim is. So just like, both sides of the story. I don't want to say something because right now, at least the FBI and stuff like that, they're not actually saying what this was.
I have heard. It's tough here at this point. Maybe we should just say, if you got the packs, be aware, follow this, see what plays out. A lot of people are pulling it right now. Some people are saying like it's a political thing too. It's a Chinese manufacturer. I don't know any of that. We haven't had a chance to look at one of these, but if you have one and you see suspicious packets, call us. We'd love to get in and help dissect that and figure it out with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess on the Microsoft fixes, like you said, one was a 0-day in Exchange, one was a 0-day in Excel that was also being taken advantage of. Allows some code execution, bypasses some checks. And then there was some stuff in Defender. There was an RCE in Defender, not exploited out in the wild, but still a big deal. And it requires user interaction. So there's that, but yada, yada. And just some other VM bus that could allow an escape out of virtual machines, out of what's it called, and then potentially attack the host and all the machines on it. So there's some pretty big ones in this. This is definitely a big patch. We're definitely
the Hyper-V thing is interesting because it seems like we're seeing a ramp up in that just this year, right? We saw the one earlier the year we talked about on here with the VM escape, and used to be just, hey, it's in a VM, whatever, it's its own thing, let's not worry too much about it. But that's kind of turning out to not be the case.
Right. All right.
Cool.
That's all I got.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for attending. Hope you enjoyed this. If you got any questions, hit us up at the Hackle Box at FRSecure.com. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, everybody. Peace.
See you.
See you guys.